would give me like $1.5 million and a Learjet and say, fly this to the Caymans, put this in the bank, fly back. They'd take a kilo of cocaine. Everybody in South Florida was doing it. Guys I knew anyway, they build a jig, sometimes a metal jig, sometimes they take a car jack, and sometimes they drive a truck over it. I never made more money until, thank God for Ron Reagan and his ad. And I loved his wife's advertising campaign. There was money everywhere. Office buildings were built. Businesses were built. The cops were little police departments. When the drug got done, they all had cigarette boats and big desks and big offices. When it comes down to split-second decisions, kill or be killed, and you see a gun in your face, it looks like a battleship cannon. It's just a barrel right in your face.
Boom! Here we go again with the Crash Out Chronicles, here again for a fascinating episode with a very fascinating guest here. Real pleased to be talking to Kenny Behr, over in Florida, who is a guy who was big into moving marijuana and cocaine, some serious weight, 70s, 80s, 90s. And then, like many people, ended up making a deal and working with the DEA. Got some crazy stories about all of this, about the whole scene of trafficking back then and what it means now. He wrote a lot of this in his book, One Step Over the Line, Confessions of a Marijuana Mercenary. Good title there. So look, great to be here, Ken. Let's get into it. How you doing in Florida? Nice and sunny there?
Oh yeah, it's sunny to a fault. It's been pretty hot, but it's starting to cool down a little bit in the end of the day. But in the middle of the day, it's brutal. But I'm used to it. I've been living here since 1973. So, and before that, I lived in New Orleans.
And now you're all relaxed and cool. I mean, all of the everything that happened in the past is kind of past now. Or you still kind of look out the window sometimes to worry about who's coming up the driveway?
Well, here's the deal. I started, selling or buying and selling drugs when I was a kid at 13. I moved to Florida in 1973. I was 16 years old. I was born on a farm in New Jersey in kind of Amish country in what I call Norman Rockwell, So I tell this, I tell in the book, I went from moving from Norman Rockwell's farm life of the, Midwest New Jersey kind of thing. And I moved to the deep South, Sodom and Gomorrah in 1969. Then I moved to Florida. My mother moved us to Florida to get away from the drugs, which was basically moving us in 1973 to the Palo Alto or to the San Francisco gold rush, moving to South Florida in 1973. So I've been involved in that lifestyle for so long. It's been 30 years. I don't play illegally anymore. But having worked for the DEA, I have to tell you, I look over my shoulder all the time. And not necessarily because somebody's going to come in and shoot me, but it's just the PTSD of living that life from, by the time I was 18 or 19, I was a truly seasoned drug runner, working for some of the biggest smugglers in the world and doing my own things. So yeah, I look over my shoulder. I don't go into a restaurant without sitting with my back to the door. And I watch, if you and I went and had lunch, I can tell you virtually everybody in the restaurant, what they're wearing, who's got a cast on, what people are doing. I just look over that's part of the curse of that life,
Yeah. Okay, I was gonna guess that was the answer. And as us journalists or narco journalists have that same problem as well.
Yeah.
Looking after our shoulder.
Yep.
Remind me the year you were born to get a sense of the timeline here.
Yeah. So I was born in 1957, which is a long time ago.
Okay.
And gee, that gives me the shakes. I look over my shoulder and see the Reaper coming, not the DEA or some drug runner.
Going back then, so you say you grew up in Amish country. I mean, were you an Amish family or you were just a regular?
No. So it was just that Dutch-German area. Actually, my family had come here in 1939 from Nazi Germany on the run, from Hitler. And my father actually was smuggled himself, left for England when he was 13. And he had to smuggle diamonds in his boots past the Gestapo that were going to be used to pay for his schooling and his room and board in England. As my grandparents wanted him out of Nazi Germany. He came back kind of like Sound of Music, grabbed my grandmother and my grandfather. They weren't allowed to take any real belongings, and they came to America.
And where did you start selling weed? Was that in New Orleans,
Yeah,
or in New
yeah.
Orleans you started
Right.
selling weed?
Well, so we moved to New Orleans in 1969. So that's the age of Aquarius, hair, hippies I moved from a farm to hippies in the streets, bell bottoms. And, my father unfortunately died right after we moved. He had a heart issue that I guess, just took him real quick. And I was 13. So, he had the drug talk with me before he passed. But once he passed, and I wasn't a street kid, I was hanging with the richest people, or the normal people in New Orleans, but pot wasn't really as prevalent. I mean, it was, but in New Orleans you're getting Mexican weed, right? So people were. I got the first thing I did was smoke marijuana. The second thing I did was eat a 4-way hit of Orange Sunshine Acid. Well, a quarter of the 4-way hit. So if marijuana wasn't a gateway drug, I don't know what was for me. One day pot, the next day acid. So when we moved to Hollywood, Florida in 1973, marijuana was different in Florida. First off, it was coming from Jamaica and then Colombia. So the weed was really good. And, my friends would introduce me and say, these are my buds. I mean, they really understood something we didn't know. Like New Orleans, it was just kind of what we call ragweed, but in Florida, it was really good. And the coke was, in high school, the cocaine was incredible. And so my brother and I, my mother had a house, and we started figuring out, like, my father was in retail. I guess it was in our genes. And we just started figuring out that we could buy pounds or buy ounces or buy quarter ounces of blow or whatever. We started out selling grams, quarter grams, bags of 2-finger bags of weed. And, we ended up with pounds of weed and ounces of blow. And that was in high school. We would sell Quaaludes, blow, and weed. And we were smart enough to, like, if it was concert season or tourist season or holiday season, like, New Year's, we'd load up on more Quaaludes, more weed, more pot. I mean, more coke to meet the holiday demand, Like if there was a big concert in town, me and my brother would go, well, we better load up. It's going to be a big weekend. So we even gave people credit, so if they didn't have the money, we'd front them with it. They'd always come back, right? They need more. And we weren't the only ones. I mean, everybody in Florida back then, all our friends were selling drugs. We were just really good at it. When I was about 18, a friend of mine came down from New Orleans, really good friend of mine, Frank Montleone, very wealthy family in New Orleans, owned some of the biggest hotels. And he introduced me to a guy named Sandy Perkoff. And Sandy, I like to say, if my dad taught me how right from wrong, Sandy taught me how right wrong could be. He was a professional criminal. He was a yacht broker, but he was. If you ever saw the movie Tin Man, or do you remember that movie with Richard Dreyfuss and Danny DeVito? They were aluminum siding salesmen. Yeah, he was that guy. The movie was made about Sandy and his friends. He loved me. I was a smart young kid. I was like 17, and he would fly in town trying to sell yachts to smugglers and whatever, trying to build a little business. He ended up hooking up with some big smugglers. And so I grew exponentially in 2 ways. One, in my own backyard with my own friends, selling more weed, more coke, trying to build my little criminal enterprise. At the same time, I'm in another side of town working with the biggest smugglers in the world, helping them buy boats and flying money to the Cayman Islands. And I was charged with flying the money for one of the largest smuggling operations in the world, Donnie Steinberg, who Time Magazine called him, I think, Marijuana Inc. He was huge. And they'd give me like $1.5 million and a Learjet and say, fly this to the Caymans, put this in the bank, fly back. And I brought my girlfriend a couple times so we'd have a cover, like rich kids flying.
Like a lot of kids sell drugs at school, and then some of them get out of it, some of them get further in. But you were selling drugs at school, and then before you knew it, you were suddenly in the whole world. How long did you stay in education doing this?
Part of my story is I'm profoundly dyslexic and ADHD. And, if you don't do good in school because you have learning issues, let's put it this way. I failed first grade. My wife's an expert in early child development. And before she even knew my whole story, she told me there's a direct correlation to doing bad in preschool and failing first grade to prisons 18 years later. 20% or so of the population is dyslexic, 20 to 25%. 50% of the prison population is dyslexic. Because what happens is when you're growing up, if you don't fit into this cubby hole, you find another cubby hole. So I basically I was a year older in high school than everybody else because I had failed first grade. So I had an opportunity to leave high school early and go to early admissions into junior college. I did that. I tried to go to regular college. I failed out because I went back to South Florida to run drugs. I knew where the money was, and I even got a real estate license. I tried that a little bit. I've always had jobs, even when we were selling drugs out of my mom's house. I delivered pizza. My brother worked as a dishwasher in a restaurant. We still had jobs. We were just, more people to sell drugs to, and to make money. But once by 18 or 19, by 19, I was on the run.
And what happened there? How did you go on the run at 19?
So
what were you wanted it for?
I'll tell you what happened. My good friend in New Orleans, he had come down to South Florida, and somehow or another, my old friend Frankie Monteleone, he's a big family, a big name, it's the big family. So he had got tied up in some drug thing, federal, selling a DEA agent a couple grams of coke. Well, back then, or just to this day, all the DEA agent has to ask is, can you get me an ounce or two? He said yes, even though if he couldn't. Now they busted him for 2 ounces. And
wait, so they don't need the dope on the table? Just the word.
You say, hey, can I get? Yeah, they just no. They said,
okay. Wow.
That's all he had to do. Yeah. So he in turn implicated me. And I'm living in South Florida with nothing to do with the drug deal in New Orleans. Nothing. So Sandy at the time, was kind of like my father, mentor. He said, listen, I know a place you can go down to Jamaica. A friend of mine owns a hotel. His name was Al Lipton. He was a cocaine smuggler. And he owned this hotel in Jamaica, which is still there, Sam Sarah. And he goes, go down there, dry out, hide. And, so I hung out in Jamaica for about 6 or 7 months, just chilling out, enjoying the island life. My old next door neighbor, this guy, Bob Silverbullet, who was a really accomplished smuggler. He taught himself how to fly. He could sail a boat. He had done a lot of things in smuggling. He came down to Jamaica with another friend of mine, Big Jeff. And we ended up bringing out 600 pounds of weed. So that was my first smuggling trick. I was 19, somewhere between 19 and 20. And we smuggled. Bob flew in and we loaded up 600 pounds of weed and sent it back to America.
How much weed could you fit on a Cherokee 6?
Well, we had 600. I don't know that, it depends how much you press it. The more you press it, you can damage the bud. So, it's about greed. How hard does like Jamaica, Mexican weed is usually bricks that they press the hell out of it. Colombian is a little fluffier. And then the Jamaican we were smuggling was called lamb's breath. And that's the finer of the two. So as one of the Jamaicans once said to me, he goes, it's like the breath of a baby lamb, man. And so we had 600, maybe you could have held 800 or 1,000, it's a single engine plane. So.
Okay. So we're talking about mid 70s, 76 kind of time.
Yeah.
70, 77. At that time, you could just fly into Florida. Was it pretty easy just to bring the plane down? I mean, what kind of, would you land at a private airport or just land some?
So good question. Bob had bought a piece of land in middle of Florida, near Lake Okeechobee, that was a fly in, fly out place, and he could have mobile homes. So he bought a mobile home. He built a dry cleaner, a coin laundry in the town. So he had a business there, and he had the trailer and he could just fly into his own property. The trick was obviously not being seen from flying in.
Hey there, people. I hope you're enjoying this crazy interview. If you like my work, if you're interested in this subject and you want to learn more, please go on to www.crashoutmedia.com and subscribe. You can subscribe for totally free. Helps to get the numbers there, to be reading this stuff, following this stuff. And if you want to support it, then for just as little as $5 a month, only the price of a cup of cappuccino. You can support the work and get full access to all of the videos, podcasts, stories, analysis, and everything else here. Now back to the interview.
They just weren't prepared like they got later in the late 80s. So he brought it in, and then I ran it up to, I had a partner in Ohio that we ended up building a big transportation business. I think we got 450, 475 a pound, which was good. Back then, Colombian was 240. I used to buy 1,000 pounds of Colombian for about 240,000, 245,000.
Back in those days, did anybody like run Florida? I mean, I know you had like Santo Traficante, apparently, like that mafia guy. I mean, could anybody just move
Yeah.
move drugs in? I mean, there's nobody saying
Yeah.
like in Mexico today, this is the plaza, and you have to pay us to
No,
move.
no, no,
Your
no. It
drugs
was
in.
wide open. It was figure Silicon Valley in 1975. Everybody building their own home computers,
Yeah.
or the Great Gold Rush. I call it of 1840s. They just were. No, anybody could do anything. The cops were on the take, and it was just wide open. My friends used to. They would Bob Silverbullet and these other guys. They would get some speedboats, and then another couple of friends of mine would fly the plane across the front of Fort Lauderdale Beach, throw the bales out. We put glow sticks on them and just scoop them up, put them in the boat, take them into the marina, go right. Well, they built a big customs place right at the edge of the port. But before that, it was just a little customs thing. Drive right by them, put it on a trailer and take it home or bring it up. There's 168, I think it's 168 miles of canals in Fort Lauderdale alone.
Wow.
I live on a canal. As a matter of
Okay.
fact, there's a 54-foot Hatteras 1974 54 hat across the canal from me, which was a very popular smuggling boat. Would hold about 3,000 or 4,000 pounds.
What point did you move from weed up to cocaine?
So what would happen is, the market just switched. First off, cocaine, when I first started selling coke in grams as a kid, a kilo of coke was $57,000.
Wow.
And people used to say to me, "Hey, is this stuff?" We used to sell a gram for 60, and they say, "Is this stuff cut?" I go, "Of course." A kilo is 60,000, and we actually used to sell 8/10 grams. This was our high school marketing. We
Yeah.
tell people, "Listen, we're not going to cut it. We're just going to give you the pure stuff that we're getting, but a little less." So, and that way we didn't have to cut it. We didn't, people did, plenty of people cut it. Because look, when it was 57,000 a kilo in 1970s, if you cut it by 50%, you were making $57,000 a kilo. Now the market wasn't as big as it got into the 80s, but that's a lot of profit. Let me tell you how the difference. At the end, I was getting kilos between $10,000 and $11,000, like any commodity, like oil, orange juice. It was a commodity here in South Florida. I had a lot of long nights doing blow. We all were hooked on it, at young ages. It was everywhere. It was prevalent. It was part of this. It was part of the lexicon of the language of Florida and America. If you watch the movie Bruce Willis in Die Hard, if you remember, there's a guy that's like a slick kind of guy, goes up to Franz Bueller, whatever the villain, and tries to do a couple lines of cocaine with him, and then the guy shoots him in the head. So, there was, and by the way, remember Charlie Chaplin, the Three Stooges, they were all doing blow when it was legal, or at least look, there were bowls of cocaine, and that cocaine was really good and really pure and really wasn't as, I hate to say it, but like, it's like, when we kept refining it and cutting it and manufacturing it, making it cheaper, they made it probably more addictive and less, more chemicals were in it. When we were kids, and like I'm talking in high school, we get a little thing of Coke, and of course it was all cut, but if you took one of the rocks and you took a razor blade, oh, it was just pink shells, and you cut it up and it would just be like diamonds. It was beautiful and it tasted good, and it got a nice, at least the first couple lines gave you a nice buzz. After that, of course, you go into a bad place. But in the end, the stuff was garbage. They were cutting it in Colombia. They were probably building it in America. They'd take a kilo of cocaine. Everybody in South Florida was doing it. Guys I knew anyway, they build a jig, sometimes a metal jig. Sometimes they take a car jack, and sometimes they drive a truck over it and just park it. But you take the coke, you break it open, you shift it all down into powder. You get your cut, which is usually anoxitol or baby laxative or whatever they're cutting it with, fiberglass, whatever they throw in there. And then you spread it out and you mist it with water. And that's kind of like counterintuitive because coke breaks down with water. That's how you dissolve it. But if you just mist it and keep layering it in and then you press it, you'll get a solid brick of cocaine that looks like it just came off the plane in Colombia. Now, the first kilos would come in duct tape. They'd wrap them up in duct tape. And that way, when you throw them out of the plane, or, that was what they came in, duct tape, and you cut it open with a razor blade. The second round of kilos came, in other words, later on, they'd come in plaster Paris, the same thing you'd wrap a cast with, harder, right? Less likely to get cut open with a razor blade and taken some out of. And also, when you're throwing it out of a plane, it's not going to pop. The third round was Carlos Later. Carlos Later, who was the big trap. He was actually used to stay at a friend of mine's house right here on Griffin Road, Frank Lindbergh. I used to give Frank product to sell. He started wrapping it in the fiberglass cast material. When the new cast, I've broken several bones, I've worn a few casts, came in fiberglass, and his coke, Carlos's coke, would come stamped with a condor on it. So if you got a fiberglass cast kilo and it had a condor on it, you knew that was Carlos Leader. And so that was the trend. That's the deal. But by the time they were coming like that, people weren't even probably breaking them down and cutting them anymore. They were just flipping them. There was so much coke in town. But in the beginning, people would literally just break it down and throw some cut in it, reconstitute it back together, and press it back into a kilo, and then sell it. And it's kind of ingenious. It's American ingenuity at its best.
When they started to really crack down on it, when you started getting South Florida Task Force and all of these boats and Navy and all that kind of stuff under Reagan, did that push the price up?
Yep. I never made more money until, thank God for Ron Reagan and his ad. And I loved his wife's advertising campaign for us. It was phenomenal. They go, this is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. And then they show a guy cooking an egg. So anytime someone saw an egg, they thought to call me, I guess. It was great marketing on my part. The most money, I went from making $5 a pound on weed to $40 a pound when Reagan came in. Because what he did was he got all the idiots out of the business, tightened up the market. Now the people that could bring it in, the demand got bigger and bigger. Any market, if demand grows and you tighten up supply, more room for profit. And that's thank God for Ronnie Reagan. There was money everywhere. Office buildings were built. Businesses were built. The cops were little police departments. When the drug got done, they all had cigarette boats and big desks and big offices. South Florida was built on cocaine and pot money from the 80s and 70s. And these people were huge. I mean, there's mansions all over town that were probably built with drug money that, stockbrokers live in today.
So kind of your generation, there's quite a lot of kind of white hippie guys moving this.
In the beginning.
Did it start to get worse, as you start to get you had all the Cubans coming in the 80s into Miami, the kind of Cuban crime wave, a lot of Colombians,
sure.
The kind of Griselda Blanca stuff. Did you start to see it become more violent, and how did you deal with that violence yourself?
A friend of mine had a friend of his, which is a bad sign right off the bat, because we couldn't find any weed. He goes, yeah, I got a guy in Miami. Next thing I knew, I'm in a warehouse in Miami with a bunch of Latin Colombians or, whatever. They're all wearing long dusters. I have 80,000 with me to buy a couple 100 pounds of weed. I look at the weed. I look up at the guy, go, this is garbage. I'm not buying this. He looks at his friend. They open up a duster. There's an M16 or an AK-47 hanging there. And he basically says in broken English, you don't have to take the weed, but the money ain't leaving. Now, looking back, I should have said to the guy, look, buddy, this isn't going to sell. Cut all the middlemen out. You got me as your guy, but give me the real shit. I can't sell this. But when all three guys around me, by the way, had machine guns, The first guy, the second, if one guy had an AK-47, the other guy had an M16. I mean, I was like, so that I lost a shit ton of money on that.
Did it start to get kind of scary and dangerous to be in the business after a while?
No, of course, I got home invaded.
Mm.
They were going around this. They're actually a bunch of Italian kids from local, but um, I write about it in the book. They went into a friend of mine's house. They robbed him. I knew they could be coming to my house. I literally, for the first time in my life, was packing a gun, and I never would carry a gun. I went to walk out of my house. I forgot a roll of toilet paper. I was starting a new shell business, a new front. So the office needed some toilet paper. Walked back in and did not look back out the window. I walk out the front door just as the guy dressed up like a plainclothes cop is standing there. So we both stop. I know he's not a real cop. He sees me, I see him, and I go to get my gun, not knowing what the fuck I'm going to do with it because I'm not going to, and he just, boom. So in the Old West vernacular, he got the drop on me. I had my 125-pound Rottweiler, but I was, so I said, hey, the guy's got, when someone puts a gun in your face, it could be a 22. I love all these people that walk around saying, oh man, I'm packing, I'm brave. Buddy, when it comes down to split-second decisions, kill or be killed, and you see a gun in your face, it looks like a battleship cannon. It's just a barrel right in your face, and you just back down. So they tied me up. I had in my old house, I had so many secret compartments built in by custom cabinetry that I didn't know. One of them I couldn't get into. I just never bothered. But I had 2 kilos stashed up in my little secret compartment. I had my Rolex on. I had my gun, and I had about 10,000 in cash in a suitcase hanging off like in the corner, like a travel bag. So they tied me up. They went through the house. They had one guy. They had my head between his ankles, sitting on the couch with me tied up with a gun on the back of my head. They found the holster to the gun. They said, hey, where's the gun? So they found the gun on me. And then they said, they took my Rolex. And then they said, what else? And I said, look, there's money right there. So they grabbed the 10 grand and left and didn't kill me. And of course, I had, at that time, $60,000 worth of coke hidden in my secret compartment. So I gave up 10 and lost my Rolex. I went out and bought another Rolex. And we were trading coke to the U.S. Army, to a friend of ours that was a special forces guy. He was an Army Ranger. And they were trading, like we'd give them blow and they'd give us claymores and laws. One of my friends got busted with a bunch of claymores and laws rockets in a little neighborhood in Hollywood. They were stashed behind his refrigerator. And so that's that example of the difference in, planning, plane from Colombia, landing, radios. We're all getting older, my partner in Ohio, we were, the market had changed. It went from big loads of weed to, more killer weed, like $800 a pound instead of $200 a pound, high end, like California weed, high end green, good buds. I had just gotten married. I had a 1.5-year-old daughter, and I was married a couple days after I came home from my honeymoon. I told my wife, I got to go. I had to go back to work. So I drove out to Texas with $80,000 roughly, and to buy 100 pounds of weed, something small, but I could bring it up to Ohio. And, the things that slowed down a little bit, I would just do, maybe take them a month or two. I'd make myself, a couple months worth of money and, it was a good deal. So I had to make some money. I just spent 40 grand on a wedding, all that, honeymoon, had to go back to work. And unbeknownst to me, my partner in Ohio had been busted. So when I called him and said, I'm back, I'm ready to come up, everything was recorded. He had said, and he was my best friend. He was at my wedding. I was the godfather to his son. My partner had 4 kids. His wife had a drinking issue. He lived on a beautiful house. His father lived next door with his mother. They had a barn in the middle. The whole property was owned in his father's and mother's name. The pot was in the barn. So the prosecutors came in and said, look, you're going to work with us, or we're going to put your wife in jail, your parents in jail, take everybody's property, and you're going to have 4 orphans for kids.
Like where exactly did they bust you, and what was the actual?
So I had the weed. It's kind of funny. I was coming out of Texas. I had my driver. We had a truck with a secret compartment that hid the weed, and I was in the chase car, and we were coming up, from Texas to Ohio. It's a couple days drive, and I get there, and my partner says, "Look, I don't want to meet at the house anymore. I want to meet at a hotel because the kids are getting too smart. That I don't want to." And I was like, "Yeah, you'd said something about that once before. Okay." Well, I get to the hotel. Turns out the Lorain County Drug Task Force is waiting for me. And as soon as I went in the room, I sat down. I remember he was wearing a raincoat. And I was like, why is he wearing a raincoat? Well, to hide the wires. He lit up a joint. Bam, the doors came in. Next thing I knew, as I say in the book, we were all laying on the floor together. And I instantly knew we weren't all in the same position, right? I was busted. Paco, my Peruvian driver, was on the bed next to, I was on the ground. And Terry was laying on the ground too. But I knew instantly Terry and I were not in the same positions. They called me out of my cell, and instead of being like there's some guy there in like a beige suit, and I remember thinking, wow, he's not wearing security blue. Where's his uniform? And he looks at me and goes, "You Ken Behr?" And I'm thinking, yeah, who else would I be? He just pulled me out of my cell. He goes, hands me these papers, and it's my indictment. And the prison guard looks at me, goes, I'm looking at this in papers. He goes, "You gonna be okay?" I go, "Yeah, why?" The guy's name was Bill. I actually was more friendly with the guard than the prisoner. He's a good guy. He goes, "Well, we're going to put you on suicide watch tonight." I go, "What? What for?" He goes, "Kid, you're looking at 55 years. And my lawyers came up and said, "Hey, look, you better think of something because you're effed." So while I was in jail, I met this prisoner, and his name was Dennis. And Dennis was in the cell next to me. He'd done 15 years in Angola, one of the worst hellholes, Amnesty International, one of the worst places on earth. So if those that don't know, it's a prison in Louisiana swamps built on an old plantation. Nobody escapes because if you escape, you end up dying in the swamps. So he was a pale white Cleveland guy in one of the worst prisons in America. He was tatted up in the worst prison tattoos. So he says to me one day, they're not going to, and then he got busted. He got out, he did 15 years, came back to Cleveland and got busted again for robbery. And he pulled me aside. He says, "Listen to me. The mores and values that you're clinging to died a lifetime ago. You see everybody in this jail? It's not who isn't a rat or a snitch. It's who hasn't yet. And he goes, and your co-defendants in pod 1 and pod 2, they've already talked or they're going to talk. I have a daughter the same age as yours. When I got busted in Louisiana, I saw her once in 15 years. You have to make a decision whether you want to change your life. And if you're willing to change your life, go and do whatever it takes to get to your daughter. But if you ever go back and sell 1 gram or $1, you're just nothing but a snitch."
When you made a deal, or did you kind of you sit down with the prosecutor or with an agent there, and they sat down and said, let's do this?
I bond out of jail, and I get home, and I get a phone call from, remember my friend Sandy Perkoff, the yacht broker? Well, he had a friend named Dave Jackson, who was also a yacht broker, but Dave was a really big yacht broker. He sold to Jimmy Buffett. He sold to, all the, he had Lear jets he sold. He had his own line of boats that he represented around the world. He had 5 offices around the world. Well, his business had went south, and he got in a sting with the DEA. He offered to sell him a plane for cash and hide the drug money, and that was illegal. So Dave got busted. So I get a phone call at my house, and I'm in jail to make sure that I never busted any of my friends that I grew up with, my high school friends, that group of guys that are on your, like your hands, like the gloves on your hand. I told my best friend, who was a big mouth, I go, "Listen, I don't know, man, Anthony, I might have to do something, work for the cops. So just tell everybody down there, that, don't talk to me." So I took a poison pill. Basically what I made it so that when I came back from it, now most guys weren't going to talk to me anyhow, right? I just got busted and looking at, but I just made sure that nobody I knew would ever do a drug deal with me. You would think, because that didn't go that way. But I get a phone call from Dave Jackson. He goes, hey, he goes, how'd you like to work for the DEA? And I mean, I'm sitting in my living room with I'm like, my wife's there. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, how would you like to work for the DEA? And I go, he goes, yes or no? I go, yes. He goes, come meet me for lunch in Fort Lauderdale. This place called the Downtown, or no, the Floridian. We sat in the back in a little booth. The Floridian's been there for like 80 years. More than one guy has sat in the back of the little booth and had some sort of clandestine conversation. But he goes, look, I've got a DEA agent. He's really a top guy. He's one of the top agents in the country, in the world. He goes, I can get you with him, and he can help you get out of trouble. I go, well, what's in it for you? He goes, it's kind of like a multi-level marketing thing. He goes, like I get credit for what you do, and you bring somebody in, and we get, like you'll have a downline. And I'm like, I remember sitting at the table going, oh, wait, it was like working for the feds is like Amway, really? And it was. And so I drove up to Jacksonville. They flew the cops in from the heads of the drug task force from Cleveland. We took them out on a boat ride on one of the confiscated boats that the DEA agent had confiscated in a prior arrest. And let me tell you how good this guy was. He's one of the top agents in the world. We did a deal where we busted the Canadian mafia for 10,000 kilos of coke in a reverse sting that he put together. And after I left, they did 50,000 pounds of hashish, one of the largest hashish bust in the time in the history, out of Afghanistan or the Middle East somewhere. So he was a big guy. But anyway, I go up to see him, and they had made a deal. They basically said, look, Kenny can't bust anybody in Ohio, but he can work for us. And whatever we confiscate, whatever assets we get, we'll give you a share of them. So you'll get your name on the case, and if there's any assets, you'll get a piece of the assets. Because listen, in the end, it's all about the Benjamins. It's all about the money. Yeah, they want to take drugs off the street, but they want Porsches, boats, cars, houses. The gold that the drug dealers worked so hard to make was needed to fund the drug wars. And remember, nobody was happier about this than the cops, the politicians, and the lawyers.
So you did 2 years where you carried on being a drug dealer, but like basically collecting information for the DEA, doing recordings for them, handling people. Now, when you were doing that, so you'd still have to go and buy drugs, and you still have to like move money around, or how do you actually move around and do that? And, as an undercover agent in a way.
The DEA handler was different than other people. Dave Jackson once said if he was in the private sector, he'd be the CEO of some multi-million-dollar company. He had a different view. What he did, he took me, another guy I call in the book Sabo, who was one of the biggest smugglers in the world. He actually brought in the largest load in U.S. history, 335,000 pounds on a freighter in the Mississippi. Nobody, and I know a lot of big smugglers, ever brought 335,000 pounds into America on one ship. And so Sabo, who's a white Jamaican guy, me, Dave Jackson, we were kind of like a DEA dream team. So what they would do is sometimes I certainly had to produce. He would call me up and go, "Hey, buddy, snitching's like selling. You miss a day, you look like crap. Who do you got for us?" But he also put me into cases like, because here's the deal. A DEA agent has whatever experience they have. I have a lifetime experience. So if I sit down next to a Mark and I start talking about the cocaine wrapped in paper bag, duct tape, and then plaster of Paris, then the Condor, I start talking about Parliament boxes and Marlboro boxes, because that was the weed that came in that specific short period of time in those boxes, how good it was, really good orange and purple bud and, red bud from, the best parts of Colombia. I knew what to say. I had the rap. So sometimes you'd introduce me to a Mark, let's say, and they would step out, right? They would just let me take over, me and then Sabo, and we just walk them down the path. It wasn't even my friends. They just say, "Kenny, we have a case for you to work on."
Sometimes to keep up appearances in the drug world, you still have to be kind of running an operation. You still have to be moving drugs. Some of the time, you can't always like just hand it into the feds, can you? Sometimes you have to like, people want to know where that drug's going and stuff, or how.
Well, not really. Yeah, they have a fight. Here's the thing: when you bust people, they don't really, it kind of ends the whole deal. But they would give us cash. Like, let's say they tell the drug dealer or the smuggler, hey, we need $20,000 for operating capital. So they take the money and go, here you go, Kenny, here's $2,000. Dave Jackson set up another guy that I knew, a big smuggler. I didn't know about it, but I watched the DEA hand him a suitcase with $100,000 in bounty money. They confiscated like a multi-million-dollar property, and Dave got $100,000 in a briefcase right on Cordova Drive, right off of Fort Lauderdale 17th Street Causeway, at a Big Daddy's restaurant or something was there, right in the parking lot.
How did it come to an end? After a while, were you kind of everyone discovered that you were under, basically working for the DEA?
Here's what happens. There's only so many, ticks in the clock. We finished up this big case where we busted this group in Canada. We convinced them that we were coke runners, the big D agent, and we flew up to Canada. I was along, to make it look like we'd flown the guy down to Miami, to Fort Lauderdale. The mark came to Dave Jackson, and I had nothing to do. I have no idea where this case came from. It was originated by another CI being confidential informant, right? But we were taking, so me, Sabo, he flew to, Dave Jackson had this mansion on the water, very wealthy guy. My ex-wife, who was blonde, 5'6", shapely, beautiful woman, she was at the pool in a bikini. The guy came in and we put on a dog and pony show, We convinced him we were big cocaine smugglers. So we flew up a Learjet. They came in a Learjet, a C-111 cargo plane, 3 cars were full of cocaine with secret compartments. And that was the start. It took actually more time than that, but that's a big case. It's a lot of stuff. It was 10,000 kilos of coke, if I remember correctly. And they were going to bring it from America into Canada. And after that bust, I had nothing left. It was time for me to go up to Ohio and face my charges. And because of that bust, of that huge bust, and then I busted 200 kilos of hash from Amsterdam. That was a big case. I busted anyway, they gave me probation. My lawyer was going to run for district attorney. The prosecutor, and then the judge, the Republican Democrats, the judge was going to run one more time for being a judge, and then he was going to retire. So they made a deal. My lawyer wouldn't run against the prosecutor in exchange for nobody would run against the judge. So the judge could spend no money to get reelected. He would run unopposed, and my lawyer wouldn't go. And my lawyer ended up becoming the district attorney later on, after the next round, years later. But that's the way that's what. And sadly, that's the way a lot of things are. A lot of the inner city youth kids that I was in jail with both times I got arrested, they were still in jail long after I got out, and I was the big guy. Because with money and with the right connections and with the right tools to bargain, and I'm not sure exactly, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just saying, that I got out. But I also did a lot of cases for the government.
And what kind of work have you done since then? Have you been
so funny you should say that, because where else do you send a convicted felon? I became a car salesman.
Check out the book. You have it there.
Here it is.
I'll flash it on the screen as well earlier, but One Step Over the Line, Ken Behr, Confessions of a Marijuana Mercenary. Check it out.
Hey, I got to tell you, that picture is when I was working for the DEA.
Okay.
And so notice the beard. So you always want to grow a beard when you're doing something undercover or some kind of smuggling gig. So you might be able to change your look. But that's the book. It's on audio. I did the audio myself. It came out really well.
I'll have all the links to it. But great chatting there. Outro, boom.